There are things my grandmother knew that no textbook could teach. She didn't speak DSM TR4, DSM 5, but she knew healing. She knew what to rub, when to pray, when to sit in silence, and when to call on the names of those who had already crossed over. You don't have to choose between spirit and science. You can be credentialed and consecrated. You can make room for prayer and still bill insurance. It isn't unprofessional, it's undeniable. Welcome to Beyond the Spot. I am your host, Tracy Gantlin-Monroy, licensed professional counselor, brain spotting trainer, somatic practitioner, and a Black Southern woman who carries both clinical training and ancestral memory in the same breath. In today's episode, we're going to ask something sacred. What happens when therapy leaves spirit out of the room? And how do we reclaim healing that centers more than a treatment plan? Beyond the Spot, Decolonizing Healing One Brain at a Time, is a podcast that weaves, my first love, of course, brain spotting, and somatic informed modalities with embodied healing, cultural consciousness, and real talk about trauma, resilience, and recovery. Hosted by Tracy Gantlin-Monroy, a licensed professional counselor, spiritual healer, and the first Black female brain spotting trainer in the world. Each episode dares to dismantle mental health myths, uplift lived experiences, and restore collective wisdom. One conversation at a time. Beyond the Spot podcast is for educational purposes and is not therapy. Please reach out to licensed medical and mental health professionals. Thank you. We know it, we witness it, we experience it, especially as a regulated, licensed mental health clinician. Therapy forgot the sacred. Western psychology taught many of us that the body and the soul should be treated separately. But I'm always fascinated when we talk about the difference of practice, theory, and even when we go to the Latin and actually look up psychology. Because when we do the translation, and I'm speaking loosely, it actually says soul care. But that's not what we practice. That what is measurable is what matters. And that what is mysterious should be left outside the door. That's truly what Western psychology taught many of us. But for many of us, especially persons of color, notwithstanding spiritual people, especially those from lineage based communities, healing without spirit feels incomplete. In fact, it feels sterile, dry, disconnected from what we know in our bones. Can these dry bones live? I'm just saying. We come from people who prayed, chanted, bathed, sang, rubbed roots, laid hands, called down God, and touched the wound. And when the healing didn't work, they didn't abandon spirit. They went deeper, not colder. Therapy without spirit feels dry, fragmented, for some, downright violent in their systems. I want to give an invitation to your openness because I want to talk a little bit about indigenous healing practices across cultures. One of the ones that I notice that people engage oftentimes, but I'm not sure if they really know what it means, which goes into cultural appropriation. I want to start off with smudging. Smudging comes from the Native American First Nations people, the Lakota tribe, the Dene, the Cree, the Cherokee. And the practice is all about burning sacred herbs like sage, cedar, or sweetgrass to cleanse spaces. Yeah, the burning of these sacred herbs actually cleanse spaces, people, and energies. And there is a spiritual role. What happens is it clears stagnant or negative energy. It invites spiritual protection and connection to ancestors. This is often co opted without acknowledgement. The root it in its original sacred roots, or use, I should say. Yeah, because it's important for us as I share these indigenous healing practices for us to root it in its original sacred use. Um, Another one I want to talk a little bit about is okay, so English is my first language. This is absolutely a Spanish term. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the curanderismo, or maybe you've heard of the curandera. Um, this is sacred to indigenous Mexicans and Central American traditions, the Aztec, the Mayans, the Nahua, right? It's a holistic healing tradition using herbs, prayer, energy healing, or limpias, massage, sobadas, and ritual. And the actual role here is it treats physical, emotional, and spiritual ailments as interconnected. Healers are known as curanderas or curanderos, often blended with Catholic saints and ancestral beliefs in modern practice. Then there's the sweat lodge ceremonies that belong to the Lakota, Dakota, Anishinaabe, and other plains and woodlands tribes. And this practice is a communal ceremony inside a heated lodge with sacred stones, often viewed as the grandfathers, led by an elder or medicine person. And the spiritual role here has to do with purification, healing, and prayer through intense heat, chanting, and ancestral invocation. And it's much like a rebirth metaphor of entering the womb of Mother Earth and emerging renewed. How about the water blessing and cleansing rituals of the African diaspora people, to include Yoruba, Pacific Islanders, indigenous Amazonians, Maori people? And this practice is the sacred use of water for emotional, spiritual, and ancestral cleansing. Often includes herbs, prayers, and offerings. And the spiritual role has to do with water as a living spirit, used to wash away spiritual debris, reconnect to feminine energy, and restore vitality. In Yoruba tradition, rivers are personified as deities like Oshun. Now, I got to tell you something interesting about the water blessing and cleansing ritual, just from my own experience. So, I am the creator of Unbound Black Women Healing, also Unbound BIPOC Women Healing. These are retreats that I have done historically in Mexico. And so, one of the activities that we do as part of our retreat time is a water cleansing ceremony on the beach of Tulum. I have an amazing indigenous healer, Maria, that lives there. And she has met with me and my groups I've taken to Mexico. But I got to say this. One of the things that's really important for me before any of my guests enter the water, before we start the healing ceremony with the Mayan clay and honey, I go in the water first. And the reason I go in the water is out of respect, to honor my Lord and Savior, to honor God, and to honor the ancestors. Fact of the matter for me, when it comes to spiritual law, I am called to respect the traditions and the customs and the land by which I stand on. Much like as I start trainings, my brain spotting trainings, I give honor to the Muskogee and the Cherokee Native Americans, which is the land I sit on in Atlanta, Georgia. So when I talk about what's sacred to a people or to a tribe, the traditions, oftentimes when we're unaware of what something is, we demonize it or we minimize it. And it's important that we not judge, but perhaps even become more intimate about what much of these things mean. They're sacred, and they're sacred to people. And honor and respect is a must. I also want to talk about the idea of drumming and chanting. And it belongs to the people in large. And when I say belong to the people, I'm just coming from a context of the cultures that engage the practices. Because no group, tribe, or community of people have a monopoly on any of this stuff. I'm just looking to give a point of reference for those of you who may be more curious. I want to give some points of reference. But when I talk about drumming and chanting, I'm looking at the pan-indigenous people, First Nations people, the Inuit, the West African, the Tibetan people, the Aboriginal folks of Australian heritage. And the practice is rhythmic drumming, song, and chant used to regulate, pray, connect to spirits, or enter trance states. And the spiritual role here invokes ancestral presence, shifts consciousness, aligns heart and body rhythms. And even in brain spotting, this could deepen access to subcortical material when used respectfully. And we even use oftentimes in brain spotting bilateral music. And I got to say this, for years, I took my son down to King Day, right? Because how much of Dr. King's history can you learn when you've been studying Dr. King since elementary school? And as a Black identifying female, um, Dr. King has been a hero in my community for many. I absolutely don't speak for all, but you would be hard pressed to be a part of the Black community and not know about Dr. Martin Luther King, Ebenezer Baptist Church, the contributions he made to civil rights. But because I am in Atlanta, when it came to King Day becoming a national holiday, and even before, um, it was important for me to be on Auburn Avenue near the church because every King Day there would be this awesome parade, and baby, they would come through with them drums and they would beat those drums, and there's something about the connection of my spirit and my soul when those talking drums are going and moving. You know, one of my very favorite things when I visit Africa is to be present with live tribal drumming. There is a deep connection in my soul with that. Um, how about plant spirit medicine, sacred plants, right? And oftentimes the people of the Shipibo, Conibo, Peruvian folk, the, um, I'm going to mess this up and I apologize, the Quechua of Ecuador, the Mazatec of Mexico, indigenous Amazonians. This practice has to do with the use of entheogens like ayahuasca. Um, what is this one? Psilocybin mushrooms, San Pedro cactus, guided by a shaman. And the spiritual role here is for spiritual insight, trauma healing, soul retrieval, and ancestral connection. These are not recreational, folks. It's used within ceremonial context and deep cultural lineage. Storytelling is medicine. The people known for this, the Navajo, the Zulu, the Ainu of Japan, the Aboriginal Australians. This is indigenous stuff I'm talking about. That was around way before Western psychology, modernized science, and all the things. And the practice here is around oral transmission of spiritual, historical, and cosmological knowledge through sacred stories. Our stories are sacred, y'all. And the spiritual role transmits values, healing codes, cosmology, ancestral memory, and community identity. Story is ceremony. Story is diagnosis. Story is treatment. And I got to tell you something. Traveling to Warsaw, Poland for that neurobiology, trauma, and psychotherapy training, even the brain is all about stories. Even with brain spotting, we often say people come into brain spotting, they want to learn about the brain, especially when they're new to brain spotting. But here's the gag: Brain spotting is all about stories, it's about narratives. So we engage these practices. Also, how about vision quests and rite of passage? And the people closely linked to this practice are the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Cree, indigenous Australian walkabouts. And the practice here is solitary time in nature with fasting, prayer, and dream work to receive vision and guidance. The spiritual role, it marks initiation, identity formation, and spiritual clarity through self exposure to spirit and nature. This is not a trend, it is sacred rites passed down and led by elders. It's important for us to understand and be careful with this cultural appropriation stuff that just gets in my crawl. How about bone throwing, divination? You've heard of it. The people associated, the Zulus, the San, the Yoruba, Ifa, Afro Brazilian, Candomblé. Yeah. The practice here is casting bones, shells, or sacred objects to receive guidance from ancestors or spirits. The spiritual role, diagnosis of spiritual imbalance, clarification of ancestral messages, and it's often misunderstood as fortune telling, but it is deeply diagnostic and relational. Okay? How about the protective talisman and symbolic objects? Talking about the people of North Africa, the Berber, the Sami of Scandinavia, the Tibetan, the native Andean. And this practice has a use of amulets, beads, stones, feathers, or embroidery to ward off negative energy. And the spiritual role has to do with embodied spiritual technology to protect the nervous system and the soul. These objects carry memory, not superstition. We sometimes, well, oftentimes, and the fact of the matter is when we start talking about social mores, when we start talking about regulation, when we start talking about compliance, when we start talking about rules, when we start talking about how people make up narratives about what they don't understand, it can be very dangerous. The culture or the cultural or the cultured nuanced practices that I shared were all indigenous. Doesn't surprise me when it comes to the West or Western psychology, how it could be so remiss in its individualistic way. Spirit is not separate from science. And I want to be mindful to make it clear that this is not about rejecting clinical excellence. I'm not rejecting science. I am rejecting the belief that it has to be cold. It's about remembering that the sacred and the scientific are not at odds. Brain spotting, for instance, is neuroscience. Yes, absolutely. But it's also deeply intuitive, deeply spiritual, deeply ancestral. It honors the wisdom of the body and the presence of the sacred. Now, when we follow the client's gaze, we're not just locating trauma, we're tracking the body's memory, the nervous system's wisdom and intelligence, and the soul's readiness. Sometimes a brain spot is a prayer. Sometimes it's a grief ritual. And oftentimes it's an altar. Yeah, brain spotting is absolutely the East meeting the West and the West meeting the East. And I would be remiss if I didn't share that I actually learned brain spotting through my spiritual knowing. When I started brain spotting years ago, I knew not even a third of the brain science that I now know. When I attended my first brain spotting training, like literally, it was like a foreign language. But I'm so grateful for Cynthia, who was my phase 1 and phase 2 trainer, because she was able to recognize and connect with my spiritual knowing. And I would give her my spiritual knowing, and Cynthia would in turn give me brain spotting language, neuroscience languaging. I literally learned brain spotting at the root from my spiritual knowing. And I stopped by today to express the necessity and importance of our bringing the ancestors into the room. Yeah, the ancestors are welcome into this space. Here's what I know from my own practice as a licensed professional counselor, as a licensed mental health care provider. Clients shift when we stop treating healing like a checklist. They breathe differently when we honor their altars, when their people are honored. When we don't pathologize dreams, when we trust the silence instead of rushing to interpret it, not every ache needs analysis. Some wounds simply need incense. Not every client needs interpretation, y'all. The nervous system doesn't just need to receive empathy. The nervous system doesn't just respond to empathy. It responds to reverence. And when we can invite in all of a human being to be with us, healing is relational. And in many communities, it's ancestral. Therapy without cultural and spiritual attunement can become just another colonized space. That's not what we're doing here. We are decolonizing healing one brain at a time. And even as I speak of ancestors, here's an invitation. I just want to give a micro practice offering. And I just want to invite you to posture yourselves in this moment. And as you become aligned with your body and into your body, just an invitation to place one hand on your chest and one on your belly. Take 3 slow breaths. Now, imagine your ancestors standing behind you, not judging, just witnessing. What shifts in your body? Yeah. What just shifted in your body? Because here's the reality, there are so many of our indigenous spiritual practices aligned with therapeutic modalities. Prime example, breath work as spiritual grounding. The practice has to do with the conscious, rhythmic breathing. Yeah, yogic breath, Sufi breath practices, indigenous breath chants, pranayama. Yeah, check this out. Breath work is spiritual grounding. It aligns with somatic experiencing, internal family systems, and brain spotting. And the function is it regulates the autonomic nervous system. It centers the practitioner and the client, and it invites presence. Breath is often the first prayer. In therapy, it becomes the first return to the body. And let's be clear, even as we begin to notice our breath and as we take in air, it feels a little bit cold. But as that air circulates through our system or through our body and we breathe it out, it becomes warm. It's warm because it has our life force with it. How about ancestral invocation? With this practice, we're speaking, honoring, or energetically calling on ancestors. Whether we're using a libation, a prayer, or even name calling. In this modality alignment has to do with trauma-informed therapy, parts work, brain spotting, and even EMDR. And the function here establishes spiritual safety. It connects intergenerational healing and it brings in unseen support. Many BIPOC clients feel more grounded when they sense their people are in the room, in the space. And fact is, none of us got here by ourselves. How about the use of altars or sacred objects? The practice is all about the inclusion of spiritual symbols, whether it be stones, candles, crystals, water, photos, rosaries, feathers. The Bible. How about that? I said that. Modality alignment, talk therapy, creative arts therapy, somatic work. Yep, and brain spotting. There are so many reasons I simply adore brain spotting because I get to trust what I know and I don't have to stop knowing what I know to use brain spotting because it can stand alone and or it's highly integrative. And so the function when we talk about the use of altars or sacred objects, the function creates a container for ritual and symbolic safety. It communicates respect for meaning making. An altar doesn't require religion. It holds intention. Spirituality and religion are not the same. Newsflash. Just saying, just putting it out there. How about sound healing and chanting? The practice has the use of mantras, tuning forks, singing bowls, humming, sacred drumming. Now, how would that align with the modalities that we practice? How about polyvagal informed therapy, somatics, resourcing? Yeah, and even brain spotting. The function supports vagal tone, emotional regulation, and trance states. The voice is an instrument of memory and release. And you hear me saying brain spotting, brain spotting, brain spotting, but here's the reality. Brain spotting, yes, was founded by Dr. David Grand, who is the founder and developer, who just happens to be my mentor. But be clear, David says it all the time. Brain spotting belongs to the people. What are you saying, Tracy, when you say that? What I'm saying is brain spotting is an international modality. And with that being said, brain spotting looks different everywhere it's practiced because it should look like the people engaging the modality. When I'm in different parts of the world, I often use languaging reminiscent of the people I'm sitting with to impart the information of brain spotting in a way that relates to the people, their cultures, and their customs. Because even in this neuro experiential model that David has developed, that we reference as the NEM, one of the assertions is that culture comes before science, right? We're talking about humanity here. How about guided imagery or even shamanic journeying or journeying? Yeah, shamanic journeying. That's what I want to say. And this practice is all about facilitated visualization to meet inner guides, ancestors, or safe places. In the modality alignment, call the role: IFS, brain spotting, hypnotherapy, depth psychology. And the function here accesses the unconscious resources and it integrates the spiritual self with parts work. You know, clients may journey internally to places they couldn't reach and talk alone. I personally find talk therapy to be outdated. And yes, every session that we engage as licensed clinicians does include a part of talk therapy. That's where we are evolving from. We started at that place of talk therapy, but understand psychotherapy is a thing and it is progressive. So, with that, I gotta say, and it's been witnessed, especially when I do demos at brain spotting trainings, oftentimes I get questions from participants. Uh, how did you know that? Or what made you make that choice point? Or what? How could you see their ancestors in the space? All the things. I'm just saying. And listen, I don't do magic, but I got to tell you, I'm clear about my gift and I'm clear about my source. And I will tell anybody that brain spotting gave me a more organized way to engage and embody my gifting. With me and brain spotting, yeah, I'm a brain spotting girl at the root because brain spotting allowed me to engage with clients with more precision, if that makes sense. But be clear, I understand the source of my gifting to be God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, and I don't even own it. But I got to tell you something: when there's that embodiment, that dual attunement frame transforms, transported by the uncertainty principle. And I'm also trained in somatic experiencing and IFS. And for the record, especially when it comes to dissociative identity phenomenons, severe attachment ruptures at the root, when we come to this idea of sensory gating, I am an integrative girl and it just works. I've sat with so many clients who could not actualize relief that have been able to, given the access, going a bit deeper and beyond talk therapy. Something else I want to mention is sacred touch or self touch. Actually, the final part of somatic experiencing training, they teach you touch therapy. And even when I was in Warsaw, Poland with Dr. Demir, who is a medical doctor as well as a neuroscientist, I was just amazed by that, in which I already knew that he was able to show me the slide, give me the teaching, and give me the meaning in neuroscience terms, biological terms, and all the things. And even when it comes to, I believe, those C4 cells that are activated when we gently touch, and how it impacts even our defensive survival mechanisms, having to do with the autonomic nervous systems and the other nervous systems, because the autonomic nervous system is not the only nervous system, but to actually see it from the perspective of neuroscience in the brain and how the physiology of touch impacts us. So, when I talk about sacred touch or self touch, the practice, I'm coming from a place of placing the hands on the heart, the womb, the solar plexus, or head during distress. Even in Warsaw, I learned that if you even just gently rub the arm or to touch someone, the impact it makes on the brain level. And so when we talk about modality alignment, I'm coming from a somatic therapy, a brain spotting, a self regulation type engagement, along with neuroscience, because there's a huge alignment there. And the function, when it comes to sacred touch or self touch, the function anchors attention, reinforces presence, invites spiritual self soothing, and listen, it can even modulate when we start talking about those receptors in the brain. So, touch is ceremony. It marks presence where trauma once marked absence. How about ritual closure and opening? The practice of lighting candles, naming intention, short prayer, bell or chime to open or close a session. And that aligns with any trauma or grief focused work. And the function is it helps the nervous system ritualize containment, transition, and meaning, especially supportive for clients dealing with grief, ancestral trauma, or spiritual awakening. Okay? And let's not forget about journaling as sacred witnessing, whereby that practice gives us that stream of consciousness writing. How about the letter to the ancestor and even dream transcription? And that alignment here from a modality perspective goes along with narrative therapy, psychodynamic therapy, and even parts work. And with the functioning here, it externalizes the voice, it reveals hidden insight, bridges self and soul. And the pen becomes both the therapist and the altar. I will never forget the day when Efu shared with me that when you write with your non dominant hand, this was in an SE context, that you're actually writing with your DNA. I'm just saying. And so, just powerful tools. Even when we talk about herbal or aromatic support, with the practice of the use of herbs, oils, or even smudging, whether we're using lavender oil, Palo Santo, frankincense. I'm a frankincense and myrrh kind of girl. With that modality alignment, that has to do with trauma healing, grief support, grounding protocols, right? I even spiritually clean with frankincense and myrrh, right? And so the function with herbal or aromatic support is it anchors the sensory memory and it reinforces somatic presence. It offers nonverbal cues of care. And the scent often bypasses resistance and brings memory gently forward. How about the moon or seasonal alignment? That practice has to do with scheduling or syncing sessions with lunar or seasonal energy. You hear people talk about the full moon, the release, the equinox, you know, and the difference that that actually makes. And that alignment has much to do with feminist therapy, eco psychology, somatic coaching, even. And what it does is that function honors natural rhythms of change and it signals inner outer alignment. And so it has to do with restoring therapy to the earth cycle, which reconnects healing to the life itself. Let me just say this for clarity as a believer. I bring the altar with me into session. It may not burn sage, but it listens the same. My clients don't need to explain why they light a candle. They need to know I won't blow it out. Western psychology pathologized what the ancestors knew as wisdom. And just because it's not peer reviewed doesn't mean it's not powerful. Spirit isn't woo woo. It's what held us together when nothing else did. And I'm going to say this again. Not every wound needs a worksheet. Some need an altar. Some may need some incense. Some may simply need to be held or felt. Yeah, I'm pausing with intentionality. I'm going slow to go fast. Just invitations I want to extend to you, as I do at the ending of all my broadcasting, my podcast. Invitations, take it or leave it. What sacred practices were silenced in your clinical training or upbringing? What does it mean to bring your full self, spirit included, into your healing work? Where have you felt unseen in clinical spaces because of your spirituality? When was the last time you asked a client about their spiritual life? Not to assess it, but to honor it. And I want to say this as a seminarian who successfully completed seminary, the ITC, the Interdenominational Theological Center, in the Atlanta University Center. Yes, there is a painting of me in the Woodruff Library on the wall. Yep, and I'm alive. Yeah, so there are 4 scholars out of the AU Center that were selected, and an artist did the renditions and donated them to the Woodruff Library. With that being said, there's something about when we invite the fullness of a person and when a client can trust that we can hold them and their spiritual life in that space. It is amongst the highest regard, honor, and respect. It is not to be assessed, right? So when I speak to you, I'm not emoting. I'm formally trained in what I speak about. I've practiced, and much of what I know has been proven. So, with that being said, this just happens to be my interest. And we're talking all about spirituality, and that's my jam. Because healing, I find to be spiritual. And there's this idea around the impact of embodiment and to be with. I'm just talking about brain spotting in a nutshell, and that's what helped me to lean in such a seamless way because that's already at the root of who I am. Now, did I learn some additional languaging? Absolutely. How about that brain spotting orientation and posturing? Brain spotting has the capacity to afford and allow me to hold containers differently, which have been having the greatest outcomes I've ever experienced as a clinician. But nonetheless, let me go back to my invitation to you. How have you been shaped to compartmentalize your own sacred knowing to fit clinical norms? What spiritual practices did your people pass down, quietly or proudly? What would your body say if it were or was safe enough to say it, pray it, chant it, drum it? What part of you knows that healing is sacred, that healing is holy, or whatever terms that you would like to reference it in your language, in your tradition, in your way, right? And I got a couple of journal prompts for you too, and I'm actually going to post those in the summary for the podcast. But I'm coming from one of the prompts would be, what did the women, elders, or spirit keepers in your life do that brought peace before they had access to therapy? How about if you could speak to your lineage today, what would your nervous system ask for? I absolutely want to express thank you for spending your time with me. There is nothing unprofessional about prayer. There is nothing unethical about calling on, honoring your people, the ancestors. There is nothing unscientific about lighting a candle for clarity. This is not about spiritualizing everything, because I'm over that, especially when it's not coming from an informed, embodied place. It's about no longer denying what's already present. Healing didn't start with psychology, and it won't end there. This is beyond the spot. I am Tracy Gantlin-Monroy, licensed professional counselor, somatic practitioner, and brain spotting trainer. And I'm calling us back, not to the past, but to the sacred memory inside the body. Let's begin there. Heartfelt gratitude, honor, and thank you for listening. If today's episode resonated with your nervous system or your spirit, share it with someone who's still unlearning and reach out to me. My website is gracecommunitycounseling.com. You can reach me on Instagram at Monroy LPC. That is MONROY LPC. Also, I have offerings from retreats to brain spotting trainings to workshops, you name it. And I am also a speaker. So if you ever need a speaker with my skill set, look me up. give me a call. Let's see what can happen. And absolutely for you clinicians and adjacent body healers, feel free to reach out and attend a brain spotting training. We have trainings all the time. Thank you.